Welcome to Out of the Blank.
Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank podcast. I'm here with a bunch of special guests today. I'm here with Max Good, Joseph McBride, Randy Benson, and Joseph Green. And then later in this episode, we might see a couple of appearances from Richard Bartholomew and David Denton if they can join us. But guys, it's a pleasure to be able to speak with you guys individually and also be able to do a panel with you guys as well. I wanted to go into this with one thing to start us off, which is I wanted to get all of your guys' perspectives going into the assassination. That means when you originally got interested in the assassination, what were you going in there knowing? Because I also think that determines on where you choose to search. So Max, we could start with you, then go to McBride, then we'll go to Randy, and then we'll go over to Joseph Green.
Well, I didn't know much besides what I had seen in, mainstream media and, just what you absorb through popular culture. But I'd lived through 9/11. I, heard all the, differing viewpoints. And I had a friend who was deeply involved with JFK research, Robert Falatico, who my film is dedicated to. He died at age 35. He was a pretty prolific researcher, young researcher. So yeah, I kind of started from scratch, and I watched some documentaries and always tried to keep a skeptical eye on both sides. I think you can have bad information coming from both sides, but once you really start looking into the details, you can make a good reasoned conclusion, which side is trying to reach the truth and which side is sort of not interested in that or trying to prevent you from seeing the truth.
Yeah. Well, I was a volunteer for Kennedy in 1960 in the Wisconsin primary and took that picture of him there. And I was very aware of his lack of security. As you could tell from that picture, I stuck my camera 3 feet from his face and blew off a flashbulb, which was very rude. And I quickly regretted it. And he looked shocked, and then he kind of recovered very fast. He was such a good politician. He broke into a big smile. And but I was aware of his lack of security, and I met him on 2 occasions, and he had almost no protection. So I wrote a short story about his assassination in October 1961 for my high school freshman English class called "The Plot Against a Country." Not a very good piece of work, but I was into some of the aspects like the autopsy and other things that came up later. And so the very first day when it happened, I was not totally surprised, but I ran to a radio and listened to the first reports 10 minutes after the shooting. And they all said the shots came from the front, from either the railroad bridge or the hill on the right, which we now call the grassy knoll. And then at 1 o'clock, they started changing the story to they all came from this building called the Texas School Book Depository behind the president. And I was already a journalist, and my antenna went up that, when they change the story without explaining why, then you get suspicious. That's one of my red flags. And by the end of the day, I wasn't believing in the official story. They were trying and convicting Oswald on TV, and I saw enough and heard enough from him to not believe that he did it. And I was interested in the case for quite a while. I got derailed by the Warren Commission a bit. I read that book and I kind of thought, well, it makes sense. But so I didn't get back into it till 66 when dissident books started coming out from Sylvia Maher and Mark Lane and people like that, 66, 67. And then I started really researching it I mean, I was reading about it all the way through, and I got interested in Watergate and the Church Committee and HSCA. And by 82, I was really just, that was my main research interest. And so all those years since, I've been studying it, going to Dallas, going to Washington to look at documents. This before they had the internet. And so I've been, you know, I'm still researching it every day. I read all the new books and look at the documents and films, you know, that Max and Randy, people make good films that are really important part of the research. So it's become a lifelong avocation for me. It's my main interest in life, I would say.
Randy?
Yeah, and so my path to where we stand now, where I am now, began with as a kid, my dad's lack of belief in the Warren Report. Real briefly, I've told this story many times, but my dad was a fighter pilot on the East-West German border during the Cold War and during Kennedy's assassination. So he was part of a fighter interceptor squadron, which meant that if, as my dad would say, if a Russian passed gas, they would be scrambled. It would be in the air. Well, they weren't scrambled when Kennedy was assassinated. And my dad recognized that at that level, protocol never breaks down. And so from the very beginning, my dad knew that something was up. My dad was a lifelong hunter, and he would always say his flag went up when Kennedy was assassinated and they weren't scrambled. So from a young age, he would, when these CBS specials would come on, my dad would just say, "This is BS." And so that was just kind of in my mind. Flash forward to when JFK, the movie JFK came out. And I was just so, what struck me most about that movie is that I hadn't known that there had been a public prosecution in the JFK assassination, and I didn't know about it. And then I learned about the Assassination Records Review Board and all the documents, the millions of pages of documents that had been released. And my question was, why isn't this being reported? Why don't I know about this? I always considered myself an intellectually curious person, and you know, I went to good schools. Why is this not being reported? Why didn't I know about it? And so that set me on the journey to researching, and then researching the researchers and making my film, and to being here and being friends with all these fine gentlemen.
Joe Green?
Yeah, I came late to the party. I think I've related this story too, but I'll do a short version. Basically, I was hired to write a script for a tiny indie film in Austin, and it had elements of the Kennedy assassination in it. And he said, "Okay, you got." And he said, "What do you know about the Kennedy assassination?" I don't know. I said, "I saw, JFK, but I." And he said, "Okay, read this." And he gave me Rush to Judgment and Harvey and Lee. I started to read Harvey and Lee. If you are not a researcher, Harvey and Lee is totally bewildering. Okay, you need to read like a dozen books before you read that one. John Evers. It's a fantastic book. Everybody should read it, but it's not your first book. Because I was like, what the hell? So I read Rush to Judgment, and that's a much better book to start off with if you're just a beginner. And that's basically, I'm trying to fight my cat here. So I wrote the script. Anyway, film didn't happen. The money fell through after we were casting, stuff that happens. And then I had read this article in Secret and Suppressed that was written by a guy named John Judge. And so, having been piqued now by reading these two books, I went down to Dallas and met John Judge at COPA And in the course of that, I think it was the first year I ran into Mr. Benson, who was making a movie about John Judge. And I always remember this, and I know Randy knows this too, is we were, after the COPA conference, we went down to Baylor University, and we went to Starbucks. John Judge, Bob Groden, Randy, and me went to the Starbucks, and Randy kind of whispered to me, he said, you know, if you were a hockey fan, this is like being with Mario Lemieux, you know, and Wayne Gretzky, you know, it's like you're having coffee with these guys. And it was like, yeah, it's incredible. And that was the beginning, basically, of my journey, and which has a lot more to do with the JFK. It goes into all these different aspects because that's what John was always interested in connecting everything. So that's where I got. And also Max, because of COPA, I met Robert Filotico, who became one of my best friends, and that's how he like sometime probably like 10 or 12 years ago, a long time ago. I remember Rob saying, I got this buddy who's making this film. And then, you know, later, like many years later, it turned out to be.
Let me ask you, Joe, I saw your first version of King Killed 63, your excellent documentary, really good film. And I'm one of the people in it. It rounded up a lot of very good people. And it's a fascinating, gripping story. Are we ever going to get that out into the public? I know you had some problems. You were going to make a documentary and then a feature story film about a documentarian who's making this film, and that was the plan. But the documentary itself holds up well. Is it possible to liberate that and get that out there somehow?
I don't know, and I don't have the footage or the film. The director, I think, has all of it. That film fell through because the motion picture, it's kind of a long, involved story, but Joe's right. The movie was about a guy that's making a documentary about the Kennedy assassination. And we had talked about it, and we said, okay, we're going to make, like, we kind of joked that we were going to make the documentary, and it stopped being a joke. And then we went ahead and made the documentary. And the idea was, as you're watching this film, you're going to see clips from the documentary, and the documentary would then be available as a separate product. Okay. A lot of money was spent on that doc, and it was part of a budget that included the film. And so when the film, there were pay or play contracts with 2 actors. And since we did not roll camera, the film now has a negative budget attribution for both of those actors, in addition to all the money that we spent on the doc. And this was also during the same period that there's been a transition where you could make a 10 to 20 million, or maybe 12 to 15 million dollar adult movie, in the sense that you're making a movie for adults. And we were throwing back to a lot of 70s pictures, like 3 Days of the Condor. That was kind of the idea that this movie was going to be. Well, they stopped making those pictures. And this is around 2013, 2014, 2015. So, you know, where we've flipped into this Marvel model where, you know, everything's going into these big budget things, or nothing at all. You can make a movie for $3 million, or you can make a movie for $200 million. And there's nothing in between.
Did they try Netflix and other big streaming companies?
But you still have to take care of that budget.
Yeah.
So that money, so whoever distributes it has like a $1.7 million red line.
Oh yeah.
And I think that's the main issue.
Yeah. No, it's a shame because it's such a good film. Played once, I think, in Dallas at the Texas Theater.
Diff. Yeah, we got a great response, and that was a better cut than the one that, because I have a very fuzzy, the one that you saw was like a, you know, something like a work print basically that we were working on. I think the last 40 minutes is basically just Doug Warren talking, because we hadn't cut that in yet. So yeah, and it's funny too, because I was watching the new Oliver Stone Jim DiEugenio one, there were two big things that I felt like you could have added to that film. Like, and one is we flew Joe out to Dallas and walked the Tippit scene with him. And I thought that sequence worked really well in our film with Joe. We put him on all the different locations, and he talked about Tippit. And then we also had another sequence where Bob Groden walked us through Dealey Plaza, and we go through and he points at all the buildings and this is the history of this, and here's the history of that. And I thought that was really cool too, and that would have worked well.
It
So
seems
you know,
criminal that this thing is locked up. It's almost like some way with fair use, somebody should get a hold of it and make some new piece out of it.
there's a lot that I don't know.
Yeah.
And because it is entirely in the director's interest to get the film out, like obviously for his career. This is a guy who had made several films already. He made a documentary about Bob Moog. He had made a documentary with the guy from Tool, successful, fairly big budgeted documentaries. And he had just made his first feature, which has also not been released. So there's this whole, and I think I told Max this, the night that we showed the film at DIFF, at Dallas International Film Festival, we got a warning shot from the 6th floor museum telling us to not show the film because we owed them money, because the 6th floor museum claims that all extant footage related to the Kennedy assassination belongs to them. And they want us to pay this crazy fee. Anyway, we said the hell with it. We showed the film anyway. And then we got a second email saying that they had sent somebody to go watch it. And they said, oh, it's quite a good film, and I hope you're going to get in contact with us soon to pay us what you owe.
Well, one point I make in my book, recent book, Political Truth, the Media and the Assassination of President Kennedy, even though the mainstream media, thank you, the newspapers and magazines have lied to us since '63, the freedom of speech is more in the line of books and films are very important. Here we have three guys who've made important films.
I made a film, by the way.
Did you? Yeah, what'd you make?
I made a film. It's actually called, dead serious, I actually made a film. It's called Blank Film. Before I came back, 1001 and 1000, those episodes, there's a break in between because 1000 was going to be my endpoint. And there's a film there. So just thought I'd mention that.
Good. Well, there's also well, yeah, congratulations. There's a good series that Leno Sanik did called 50 Reasons for 50 Years. And I did an episode called Political Truth, which is sort of like the short version of my book. And I also did one on the Tippit case, which you can see online. So those documentaries have really contributed a lot, and other ones too, like Rush to Judgment, made by Lane and Emile D'Antonio back in 66, 67. Those have helped advance the case by putting witnesses on the screen and analyzing the results. There have also been a lot of meretricious documentaries made by major networks and other big money people. But The Men Who Killed Kennedy was an interesting documentary. It had some flaws, but full of interesting material. And the books, we're more free in this country with books. I mean, we have some problems with censorship and book burning, etc. But you can get books out self-published. I've done that with my two Kennedy books. Into the Nightmare was the other one, because they're not the kind of thing that mainstream publishers will deal with. I offered both of them to mainstream publishers, and like one editor at Simon & Schuster's said about my media book, he said, well, I believe there was a conspiracy, but we can't publish a book like that because you attack the New York Times all the way through it, and we need them for reviews. I mean, he was honest, but it's deplorable, so, but it's wonderful that the Amazon will sell your book, and you can get a fulfillment house to print it at a relatively low cost. They get a share of it, and Amazon gets a share, and then you hire a designer, and the revolution, and you can design your own book or have somebody do it for you, and get it printed by a good fulfillment house. And it's important to make it look very good, which I take a lot of care on that. But you can compete in the marketplace. Before that, you couldn't couldn't get your book in bookstores. My first book was self-published back in the 60s. And I naively went around to bookstores and offered it to them, and they said, "Are you kidding?" So we're very free in that sense, for the time being, at least. So a lot of great books have come out in the case. Harvey and Lee is an amazing book. John Armstrong did 10 years of research, and he's well off because he's, I guess, a real estate developer, and he spent a lot of money. Most people who've done books have spent a lot of their own money on it. I've done that. I've lost a lot of money on each book, even though they keep selling. But we don't do it for profit. We do it for love of Kennedy and love of the truth. And but Armstrong just researched it to the nth degree and came up with some amazing discoveries. And I was skeptical that there were two Oswalds, but he really proved that to me. And that, if I write in my new book about, if we had known these things on November 22nd, 1963, it would have blown our collective minds that there were two Oswalds and all kinds of other strange things about the case. Oswald was a fake defector, and
which Oswald are we talking about, though?
Well, that's a good question. There really were two. The only thing I think is a little, I don't totally go along with Armstrong. He seems to be very sure at each moment which Oswald he's talking about. He calls one Lee and one Harvey, because in the immediate wake of the assassination, some government documents and some official sources called him Harvey Lee Oswald, and that wasn't just a mistake. That's the way his name was written in a lot of documents. And so Armstrong argues that those were the two Oswalds, and he goes into detail convincingly, but I don't think you can really know which was which on which occasion. But in the theater where Oswald was captured, there was another man captured in the balcony who may have been the other Oswald. They were both there, but why they were both there at the same time, we still don't know. So there are mysteries that still continue, and that's why books keep coming out. I read new books all the time, and it's a very lively field.
I just want to mention, because if you're talking about the Lee Harvey Oswald in Mexico, I went through all last night looking through documents, 2021 documents that were released, and it's clear it wasn't Oswald, but they were seeing in Mexico. There was even a fake story from an agent named Avardo, who turned out to be like a Nicaraguan intelligence agency officer, who during interrogation fabricated a complete story about seeing Oswald make a transaction with someone over $6,000 in cash, that in an episode with Randy and David Denton I pulled up, that wasn't real. The only thing that I have is I talked to Bart Camp, and Bart Camp talked about this, the safe house or whatever, that boarding room that Oswald went to, and he said that's not real. And I asked him why. And he said that because the person that was labeled on the name was Oswald Lee. The people that have seen the person that lived at that building apparently did not fit the description of Lee Harvey Oswald, the one that was arrested and taken into custody. Now, like I said, there's going to be differences and discrepancies on obviously some things. I've seen documents say that he did have a boarding house. I've heard Ruth Payne mention that he had a boarding house. I have no clue, but it gets into this area of like, apparently there's like infinite Oswalds. I'm coming across a lot in different documents, different name discrepancies, which I mean, obviously are going to make up a lot of things. But one thing that I wanted to kind of mention to get us into this like focal point here is that it's going to be a lot in a second. I'm sorry, guys. So what I mentioned to you guys before about 1035 960. 1035 960. Now, I have always talked about like the media's in on government and covering up, and there's all these narratives spinning. Now, if I show it on screen, let me know when you guys can see it. 1035 960. Our concern from the day of President Kennedy's assassination that there was speculation about the responsibility for his murder, although this was stemmed for a time by the Warren Commission report, which appeared at the end of September 1964. Various writers have now had time to scan the commission's published report and documents for new pretexts for questioning. And there's been a new wave of books and articles criticizing the commission's findings. In most cases, the critics have speculated as the existence of some kind of conspiracy and often have implied that the commission itself have evolved, presumably as a result of the increasing challenge to the Warren Commission's report. A public opinion poll indicated that 46% of the American public did not think that Oswald acted alone, while more than half of those polled thought that the commission had left some questions unresolved. Doubtless polls ahead would show similar or possibly more adverse results. This trend of opinion is a matter of concern to the U.S. government, including our organization. The members of the Warren Commission were naturally chosen for their integrity, experience, and prominence. They represented both major parties. They and their staff were deliberately drawn from all sections of the country just because of the standing of the commissioners' efforts to impugn their rectitude and wisdom tend to cast doubt on the whole leadership. Hold on a second. I'm going to zoom in. My old eyes can't read that. Of American society. Moreover, there seems to be an interesting or increasing tendency to hint that President Johnson himself, as one person who might be said to have benefited, was in some way very responsible for the assassination. Innuendo of such seriousness affects not only the individual concerned, but also the whole reputation of the American government. Our organization itself is directly involved. Among other facts, we contributed information to the investigation. Conspiracy theories have frequently thrown suspicion on our organization, for example, by falsely alleging that Lee Harvey Oswald worked for us. The aim of this dispatch is to provide material for countering and discrediting the claims of conspiracy theorists, as to exhibit the circulation of such claims in other countries. Now, action. We do not recommend that discussion of the assassination question be initiated where it is already not already taking place. Where discussion is active, however, addresses are requested. This is literally a document on telling the media how to handle what they would call new evidence or any types of claims of this sort. That means anybody that writes a book about it, basically to discuss the publicity problem with liaison and friendly elite contacts, especially politicians and editors, pointing out that the Warren Commission made as thorough an investigation as humanly possible, that the charges of the critics are without serious foundation, and that the further speculative discussion only plays into the hands of the opposition. Point out also that parts of the conspiracy talk appear to be deliberately generated by communist propagandists. Urge them to use their influence to discourage unfounded and irresponsible speculation. Part B, to employ propaganda asserts to answer and refute the attacks of the critics. Book reviews and features articles are particularly appropriate for this purpose. So the reason of me reading that is, for the longest time, I thought, oh my God, media's in line and it's a bunch of this, and it sounds conspiracy talk. The main focal point I give you in Max's film, he has Vincent Salandria talking, rest in peace. But the way he talks about things is someone that knows a lot about this stuff. A lot about this already. So for the general public, it just seems like how my grandpa would be ranting about something. It doesn't seem like there's no evidence. They need to see it right in front of them. And he's actually 100% right. And this becomes a big issue. And here's my conflict right now. And I'm sorry, I'm ranting a little bit, but when I hear Marina Oswald and Max, when he talks to her on the phone and she says, don't waste your life on this, from all my individual talks with all the experts I've talked to on the Kennedy assassination, it has either been, it's never going to be solved, or it's been, I'm happy that a person your age is interested in something like this. It's like two kind of polar opposites, people that see a more pessimistic view and people that see a more optimistic view. Then I point to Randy, who in the Searchers film, he has someone that quotes saying, this is something that's just going to ooze out. And I think that sparks with the newer generation going into it with the eyes of them not being around when this happened. I know that seems like a giant shot in the foot because you don't know all the events that transpired, but I think you have an impartial view when you look back through history at the records that we do have and the evidence that people have spent so many years working so hard to be able to decipher. That's the one thing last night when I went into looking at these archives, I wasn't looking at Lyndon Johnson being the culprit. I wasn't looking at the involvement of the Paynes. I went into it on an aspect of the guy who apparently killed the president is my age. Not only is he more successful in the aspect that he has a wife and he has kids, I'll get there eventually. But you look at this, what does that do to the family? Where I looked into Marina Oswald, there's not really any stories about her until 2021. There was something where she reappeared and something, and someone got a picture of her. Then I looked at the interview that her kids did and listening to her saying, I don't think that my dad did this or all this. And you get into this aspect of like, so in that article 1035, if it makes a politician or the American government look bad is where we draw the line. kind of like the famous Nixon tape where Nixon is kind of sunk him in a sense, basically said, if the president does it, it's not a crime. You start going, okay, so wait, hold on. The rules of we don't affect you. There's exceptional few, basically. And what I started to notice is that when we talk about the Kennedy assassination being a focal point, I bring it to the aspect of, to get people on board with the way that you view the Kennedy assassination is the same way where you start opening up the door to the Kennedy assassination. You can open up the door to the aspect of, I think we all agree that the FBI killed Martin Luther King. Maybe that's a kind of a short cut of saying it. There's probably a long in-depth story there as well too. But then you look at RFK, you look at a bunch of different things, and you start realizing that there's uncontrollable aspects of the Central Intelligence Agency, Defense Institute, covert operation capabilities that you need to start questioning. Doesn't mean you're trying to expose something, but I think this is what we talk about when it's kind of folding the puzzle pieces together. There are things in society and right now in life, the weirdest documents, the stuff that gets labeled controversial or conspiracy, happen to be some of the biggest fucking events in our lives. 9/11 is a conspiracy controversial issue. JFK Kennedy assassination, conspiratorial controversial issue. There's a lot of things that these words that they use, much like Rich explained to me, is that the derivative between fantasy and conspiracy, what people mention, they got us all programmed, man. I hate to say it like that because it ends up saying like, oh, no, it's not that though. It's real. There's document right there I just showed you. To slander a person's character, to make someone look bad if they go against the official statements, to get media to fall in line. I mentioned this with Geraldo Rivera. The Geraldo Rivera you guys know is different from the one I know. I know him as a talking head on CNN. You guys knew him when he was interested in giving conspiracy voices a light. Now we're entering a society where there's so much content creation out there. You have people that do deep political shows. You have people that do so much. You have me getting interested in the fucking assassination, so much so that I'm up all night staring at a computer screen, looking at the documents like, did he kill him? Did he kill him? I don't know. I'm going back and forth, left and right, where you just open up the door of interest. And I think it's not necessarily to be the point of being cut off, but to stopping something that's been going on for a long time. And I bring back to the point of where I've always focused kind of a little bit, which is the Central Intelligence Agency or some type of deep organization conspired to kill JFK. I stand by that. And the reason why I say that is maybe it's not the CIA, but it's people acting in the CIA, individual actors. Alan Dulles, for instance, there's documents in the 2021 release that show that there was operations that Alan Dulles was in charge of that no way Kennedy knew, but Castro found out about it. 13 American soldiers that were arrested trying to raid a boat called the Amigo that was published in the Cuban papers. Castro saw that. Did JFK see that? I doubt it. You get into this aspect of, so you now have people that are thinking on their own accord, maybe because they were given weight one time to, and now they've just constantly done it without, oh, he gave me acceptance on that one thing, I can just do it on this one, right? You look at the Bay of Pigs, how many weapons or vehicles did we leave over there? How many stuff did we have involved over there that Kennedy probably didn't know about? And you open up the door to, you have a bunch of things going rogue and a bunch of things going wrong at once. So when it comes to no evidence, okay, what about just raising a flag at something? What about just saying on an aspect of Dallas police could have been involved, mafia could have been involved? All of it has weight to it, I think, in a sense. And I think we're losing common ground on the aspect of when you get so invested, you write a book, you do a documentary, you do whatever, you can easily just, you're going to learn a lot, but you're going to focus directly into whatever you're looking at. And then that's going to be the main point. Then you lose all the other stuff and everyone else starts grabbing their main points and running off. That's why it's interesting to get all of you experts in a room, because you all have individually looked into something different. And then me that's talked to you all, I've kind of consumed a little bit of information that you've all kind of given to me. And I think it starts putting up a bigger picture. I think all of your guys' work and research is important. And I also think that we need to start looking at an aspect of what are things that we can agree on even people that aren't involved in this, to look at a conclusion to something that needs to be out at this point. It's been far too long. They're past due. I mean, they're still holding documents now. And people say, well, what weight's going to have in those documents? I just read some stuff from 2021. To me, that's pretty crucial shit. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I'm also ranting.
Millions of pages have come out in recent years, so the case is far from closed. And as you say, there's still documents that are withheld illegally by Trump, and then Biden continued that, even though they should have been out. One thing I'll say that's very optimistic to me is that you look at Robbie, 24 years old, and my students at San Francisco State, and maybe Randy could mention this too. I find them very open-minded because the people my age, baby boomers, I suffered through a lot of arguments where I try to bring up the case and they didn't want to talk about it. They're very threatened by it. And they would resort to ridicule, or as the 1967 memo you read states, the word conspiracy theories, that term was popularized by that document. The media pushed it really hard. And that's a way of shutting down discourse. But now it's used indiscriminately for just about anything. I mean, the 9/11 officially is a conspiracy theory that 19 Arabs armed with box cutters brought down the air defense system in the United States, which is preposterous. But I mentioned to somebody who believes that, and I said, well, you're a conspiracy theorist. I was kind of teasing her, and she said, what? And I said, well, 19 guys acting together, that's a conspiracy. And she said, oh, yeah. Well, what it means to people is basically a dissident opinion. It's not the government's opinion. But the young people don't have the hangups that our generation had. And one of the things I just read, yet another survey of how the trust in the media has declined drastically over the years. It's very low at the moment. And back when I was a young guy, we tended to believe the media and the government. We were naive to a large extent, but if Walter Cronkite got up on TV and said that's the way it is, we believed it, even though he turns out to have been lying a lot. Most trusted man in America. But the young people today don't suffer from that problem. So they're very interested, very open. I show clips from films, and I show the Zapruder film, and I talk about how that was faked, and they listen carefully. And I show the long sequence from JFK where Garrison gives his 21-minute version of what he thinks happened, which is quite accurate. And I show Wag the Dog, the part where they're fabricating a international incident in a TV studio to show how easy it is to do that kind of thing. And they're the kids, and I show excerpts from Rush to Judgment with witnesses like S.M. Holland and Quilla Clemens giving very valuable dissident opinions. And Randy's done a whole, he has besides his film, The Searchers, he has like a many hour version, which I bought, of the raw interviews with all these great early researchers. Is extremely interesting. And then you have Max going into Ruth Payne, who's a fascinating, important figure in the case. And so if people are open-minded, they're interested in reading these books and seeing the films and studying the documents. But a lot of people just shut down. They won't consider anything different. But that's the problem we have. But we have to keep after it.
I found that to be the case too, that my students are very open-minded and want to learn more. And unlike people in my generation or my parents' generation, they're okay saying, I don't know, I want to learn more, which is very refreshing to me. Yeah, so I agree, Joe.
As Socrates said, that's the beginning of wisdom, when you say I don't know something. But it takes somebody with a bit of courage to admit that, instead of making up some bullshit or following the official line. But Max's documentary has caused a lot of interesting discussion and controversy already. Max, did you expect all that, or you probably had to expect some of it? Or how's that feel when people are going after the film or praising the film?
Yeah, I expected it. And I even expected more criticism from the conspiracy side, because the film tries to be sort of objective and balanced and not make any overt conclusions. But I tried to stick with the truth and allow the audience to make their own decision, which side they trust, which of the people in the film they trust. If they, do they trust me or any of the interview subjects. You have to be on your toes while watching that film, and that's kind of the whole process of truth. You're not just absorbing what some authority is telling you and believing it because that's what you're supposed to do. You are involved in a intellectual, logical process of taking in data and knowledge and facts and opinions and arguments and coming to your own conclusion. That's what it's all about. And if we can't do that, we can't have a democracy, obviously. But yeah, it's strange how people on the conspiracy side sometimes are in this defensive position, trying to say we're not crazy, you know. They're, because that idea is out there in the media, in the popular culture, even though on the JFK issue, you know, an overwhelming majority of people believe there was a conspiracy, and you know, you had the HSCA saying there probably was, and you have 5 million pages of documents in the National Archives, and you have the JFK Records Act, and you have LBJ saying there was probably a conspiracy. You have all these people. With all of that, somehow still, you know, this position is pushed to the margins. It's really telling about who's in control of the debate and the dynamic here. Who's framing it? You know, it's a minority. It's a minority who's telling us that it's somehow ridiculous or marginal and, you know, not respectable to take the conspiracy position.
I often say that the 30% of Americans who believe the Warren Report are all members of the media. It's a bit exaggerated, but Carl Bernstein wrote a famous article that the CIA and the media, you can read that online, in 1977 for Rolling Stone. And he did a lot of research. He said there were about 400 media members then who were working for the CIA, either full-time disguised as journalists or kind of part-time doing favors for them and writing stories that the CIA planted with them. You can still see them in the media. So, I mean, that's a big part of the problem, is the media and the government are kind of blended into, the mainstream media are kind of an arm of the government, propaganda arm. And so when people attack and ridicule it in the New York Times that there could be a conspiracy, a lot of people just buy that. And then when Random House put out Gerald Posner's Case Closed, they had a tremendously large media campaign to back it. And the media just fell for it like a ton of bricks. They just loved the idea there was a book like this that basically was written to attack Stone's JFK. But JFK itself was a huge hit, and that really bothered the media gatekeepers. The public just went out and they were really interested in the film. But the mainstream media are the ones who are kind of the enemy. And, you know, I was saying that long before Trump started saying that. I say it for different reasons, you know. But it's the alternate media, podcasts like this one, and books and documentaries. They may not have a huge audience like the Washington Post and the New York Times, but you know, it's an important strain of discourse that we put out.
Take the knife out of my back. Not a large audience. Good God.
I have been noticing among young people online, it seems like this interest in hidden history is getting a lot more serious in the last 5 years or so. I wonder if your guys' students seem to be more open recently than they were before, but I think it has something to do with the Bernie Sanders campaign, then Trump, Epstein, and it's sort of a breakdown in faith in institutions, and, you know, seeing chaos and hypocrisy from the authorities.
I think it had to do partly with the, you know, the stolen election of 2000 and 2 illegal wars based on false premises. Pretty much everybody realizes that now. And that's as serious as it gets when you go to war twice. And you know, the Afghanistan war, which some Democrats defended, lasted 20 years and it didn't do anything. And the last people to conquer Afghanistan, it was Alexander the Great and his troops a long time ago. It's a futile exercise, but the public realized that they were conned, and they were seriously, hundreds of thousands of people died because of these lies. And I think the young people and other people are very skeptical now. One thing I'll say about, Max, when he mentions that he wants people to make up their own minds, I admire that. And I told him, John Ford is my favorite filmmaker. I've done 2 books on him, and he was notoriously uncommunicative in interviews. He wouldn't talk about his own films. He wouldn't tell you what he intended. And that could be frustrating to interviewers like myself, but I came to respect that, because what he was basically doing was saying, I'm not going to explain my film to you, you just have to see it and make up your own mind, which shows a great trust in the audience and great faith. And I think that's what Max is doing. He's not, saying, okay, folks, here is my solution. He's just laying out all the facts as he sees them. But, different people interpret it according to their own biases, but hopefully it'll change some minds. I think it is. And the fact that it's threatening some lone nut people and Warren Commission people is a really good sign. That's what happened to Oliver Stone too. I interviewed Oliver Stone a couple times in the wake of the JFK controversy, and he was kind of stunned. I was a bit surprised. He's a very sophisticated guy, and he hadn't realized the media barrage that he would get. And I fully anticipated that, because I had studied the media for a long time, and they just went after him. The New York Times ran 30 articles in 1 month attacking him. And then the cartoonist Gary Trudeau finally did an op-ed cartoon showing Stone driving through Dealey Plaza in an open car with people shooting at him from all directions. And Trudeau's office called me to get the box office returns on the film, which were already huge, and they put that in there. And but it became this vendetta the media had against him. And Jack Valenti compared him to Leni Riefenstahl, and terrible stuff. Jack Valenti was the lobbyist for the film industry, but he was also a close aide of LBJ's, hardly an objective observer. But you kind of have to expect that. The more visibility your work gets, the more it gets sniped at.
Yeah, I've been reading your book here, Joe, and I read about that Gary Trudeau piece. I tried to find it online, and all I could find was some comics where he seemed to be ridiculing people at JFK conspiracy conferences.
Oh,
Do you know if that what his take is? Yeah,
I didn't know that, but yeah, well, I mean, he is a satirist, but he, I don't think, I mean, I have a subscription to the New York Times, and you can look in their archives for any issue in their history, and you can go, if you have to go to the date, and look it up, and you can find it online, but it's not easily available, that cartoon. But I didn't know that he was attacking people. But, part of the problem is, if you want the big advances, the big salaries, the big awards like Robert Caro gets, you have to fall into line with the Warren Commission, or else you get ostracized. That's the way we deal with people mostly in America. We don't send them to gulags yet, but we have an intellectual gulag where they're not allowed on TV or not allowed to publish with major publishers, etc.
Well, I think that's going to change with a lot of independent content creation. I mean, people like the conspiracy stuff, but there's also conspiracy to a point. Like, there's weird things where the Kennedy assassination, none of the conspiratorial talks or any of this stuff can get publicized on television, but there'll be independent viewers like myself that'll be interested in it because they obviously see something there. What I don't really like is that with 1035, you can look at it as slandering a person's character, but it's not just that. It's the best divisive strategy to get people to turn on the people. You have people in the public that are now being like, that's a conspiracy person, don't listen to him, that's this. So now you're being slandered from both angles, not just from attention from the media, but you're also being slandered in the sense that the public is rejecting you. And that's a very dangerous route when we start to turn on ourselves. I think when there's issues and things of some sort that come across where you're reading something and it comes up in your head, what? Like, it's confusion. I think you've just stumbled upon, especially if you're looking at documents, legal speak. I won a court case against John Hopkins for a medication that I needed that they were just throwing me through the ringer. Now we could say, oh, that's just the medical industry is just kind of messed up. Okay, well, why is it safe to say the medical industry is messed up? Why is it safe to say that church issues, there might be some issues in that sort, but you can't question your government, but we can question governments from overseas. We can question governments that are happening over there. Oh, that's Russia. That'll never happen here. Marina Oswald, famous quote, 93 interview, talks about, I didn't think American government was like this. I'm guessing she's assuming she's trying to relate it to her government in Russia, where you start going, okay, we can question other governments. We can check other ruthless dictators or things that we might be propagandized saying maybe Castro was bad. Let's say that. But also at the same time, did our media specifically character assassinate someone too? Did they breed this type of hate inside of us to do these types of actions? And then they ended up being correct only on an aspect of we have independent people in the CIA or whoever that ended up provoking him in a sense. I mean, we question morals on different values. When we talk about someone's religious purposes or something like that overseas, oh, that's just their culture. That's their culture. But when it comes to their government, man, we don't expect it ever coming here. And we don't ever expect to question anything. We talk about an authoritarian system. People immediately think China. I mean, that could be us in so many senses. It possibly is. Censorship's an issue. A lot of things are an issue. But imagine when it comes across legal speak. When I won this court case against John Hopkins, they gave me a document of my win that I didn't know I fucking won. I was like, did I win? Did I know? Yeah, no. It's legal speak. It's the most difficult thing to understand. And I think when you stumble across it, you're confused. An immediate thought comes into your head. Is this what this means? And then you have to reread it and you go, oh, no, it's not. Something happened in that first read that made you look at it and in a different light than what it was initially intended. If I mention something to anybody, the way us as expert, or not me as an expert, but you guys as experts could say, the government uses LSD on people. There's experimentation history on it. You'd all be like, yeah. But a general public person that has no clue that this is real would be like, that's fucking insane conspiracy thing. Now, I came across this while looking through the 2021 documents, and it was let's see, make sure I get the right document. I got like 50 different one here. So this talks about interrogation methods to witnesses. And the reason why I clicked on it was in the 2021 document, the title name, I've always mentioned MK Ultra, but it said LSD. And when I clicked on it, it says this is how they're going to handle witnesses or interviewees. Will fall into two categories: those discussing information on the structure and functions of CIA plus substantive work, including the legal basis of DDO activity and approval process, the capacities of the CIA and its responsibility to provide information for other government entities. In this category, a CIA representative may be present at the interview. Those who will be asked questions regarding CIA or executive branch abuses or other controversial specific matters where improprieties may have occurred. In this category, a CIA representative may not be present unless an exception is negotiated. Okay, right? So that's normal. You don't want to have talking to the interviewer or interviewee, and then you have the CIA you can't get them to talk shit on the CIA if the CIA is there, right? That makes sense. But then what was really questioning to me was when we start falling down into this part of jeopardy of interviewees. So in category 3B above, abuses and improprieties, an important issue is how can the legal rights of the individual be best protected in cases where U.S. law may have been violated? The problem of criminal jeopardy probably will not arise in the case of overseas operations, but the SSC could revive some of the domestic improprieties covered by the Rockefeller Report, such as the LSD experiments or mail intercepts. So you get into this aspect of if you're overseas doing covert operations or something like that, this all doesn't apply to you. That means they can interview you however the hell they want to. But when it goes to what I mentioned before about you're not going to have a CIA operative unless there's an exemption on there. Who writes the exemption? They do. So they can make an exemption over anything. We talk about the interview or the interrogation of Oswald, for instance. You got how many hours of interrogation and none of it was written down and none of it was recorded? You didn't fucking bother to videotape it? I'm not saying I'm exposing anything, like I said earlier, but raising a flag. Then you get into this aspect of we talk about Dallas police involvement. McBride, I know you mentioned to me that someone saw what they thought were two people dressed up in Dallas police uniforms around the Tippit case or the Tippit scenario that was going on. Possible Dallas involvement, for instance, where I start going, imagine you just got someone in your custody who is blamed for killing the president. do you not think people are having thoughts in their heads about all these side activities that they're doing, where they start going, the CIA and the FBI are going to be coming in here pretty soon. Maybe it would be better to get rid of this person and get him out of our custody. Something's got to happen. Then you look over to Jack Ruby. Jack Ruby, 40 something hours later, decides to kill Oswald, where you have a point where Robert Kennedy, at this time, when they hear the news that Oswald's been killed, when he's a child at the time, is in excitement, but everyone in the room, his family, their faces weren't so excited. Why did this mafia person, this mafia wannabe, kill this person that killed the president? Was he a patriot at heart? I mean, it would make more sense if you look at the Warren Commission that talks about Jack Ruby crying, or emotional empathy that goes out to Jackie Kennedy, and Jackie's welcome at his club at any time. I mean, there's very weird things about these personalities and these characters that don't line up.
Well, one thing I did early in my research, when I had to go to the National Archives to Xerox documents, I was trying to track how many Dallas policemen knew Jack Ruby, and I lost count after a while. It seems like about 600 or something.
They were inviting him to the club.
Yeah, he was one of their guys. Yeah, he would invite the officers to the club, give them free drinks, and girls would, be provided to the policemen. And he was very corrupt. He was basically the mob's bagman to the Dallas police. He was heavily involved. And I really do think the Dallas police were directly involved in, before the fact. It wasn't just after the fact. They were operationally being used, cooperating with the FBI and the CIA. I mean, one of the revelations that I found out about Tippit was his father told me that Marie Tippit, officer's widow, was visited shortly after the assassination by another policeman whom I identified as William Menzel, who was the guy assigned to the district where the shooting occurred. Tippit was miles away from his own district. Menzel came to her and said that he and Tippit had been told by the police to track down Oswald in Oak Cliff. And this was by 12:45 at the latest. They were out there trying to find Oswald and driving around. And then Menzel told Mrs. Tippit that he got into a car accident and didn't make it to the scene, and JD got killed. And he felt bad about that. He said, if I hadn't had that accident. Well, I looked, and there was a car accident within 2 minutes of the Tippit shooting, about 2 blocks away. And Menzel was the officer called to investigate, supposedly, and he was there for 4 minutes, and then he cleared the accident. How can you clear any accident, even a minor one, in 4 minutes? It suggests he didn't really write up a report. And maybe he was the guy who had the accident. But so these two guys, Dallas policemen, first of all, it shows that the Dallas police knew where Oswald lived. They had him under surveillance. They knew his address. And he was living under this assumed name, as you mentioned, O.H. Lee, but they knew where he was. And there was also a suspicious police car that showed up outside his rooming house about 1 o'clock and honked the horn. And then I think he drove into a police ambush. And there was an officer in a police car in the alleyway there where Tippit pulled up and blocked the alley, and the police car went backed out and went toward Jefferson Boulevard. And there was a policeman in the car, and then there was another person who came out of the car and shot Tippit. And then there were suspicious reports that the ladies at the corner house came outside when they heard the shots, and policemen were already there, they said. And that contradicts the official version that it took about, 10 minutes for policemen to show up. And this officer, Kenneth Croy, and Officer Westbrook, who was in charge of personnel, were on the scene soon after that. So my book has opened up a lot of investigation into the activities of the Dallas police, who I think were heavily involved in the case. But the more you study it, the more you find people who are involved, that you didn't even realize. Like I thought that Kenny O'Donnell, who was Kennedy's chief of staff, in effect, he was the appointments secretary. I believe he was an inside man on the conspiracy. You need people on the inside. There were about 5 Secret Service men, according to Vince Palomera, who were involved, at least 5. And that's how you do an assassination. You have to corrupt people close to him. And so you could, like O'Donnell helped plan the parade route, which is a critical decision to route it past the Texas School Book Depository. So people like to ridicule the idea that there was a vast conspiracy, but it was a rather large conspiracy. A lot of people had roles to play, and they were probably compartmentalized. You know, Ruth Paine is a case in point. Did she know the whole picture? I don't know, or just her little part, important part in the picture. She gave lodging to Marina Oswald. She kept track of Lee. She got Lee the job at the Texas School Book Depository. That's pretty important stuff, you know. And then most of the evidence against him came out of her garage, and through Marina and Ruth were pouring out evidence to the Warren Commission. And what was that all about? Why were they doing that? You know, Max goes into that in a very good detail. It's remarkable you got her to talk as much as she did too. How did you get her to trust you to that extent, to talk fairly freely?
Well, I was honest with her. I told her I had heard about the suspicions, and I wanted to give her a chance to respond to them, and that wanted to tell her story. And the first thing she asks people usually is, what do you know about the Walker shooting? Or do you know anything about that? That's just her little test to see if you are knowledgeable on the case at all. So at least I knew the details about the Walker shooting, so I could pass that test. But she's fairly open. From what I hear, she's talked to everybody who's asked. She talked to Russ Baker and David Talbot and other people who've gotten in touch with her. People send her photos for her to sign, you know, as JFK memorabilia, and she does it just out of respect, or wanting to please people. But if you go on eBay, you can always find pictures signed by Ruth Paine, so
She's in the phone book too. You can call her up in Santa Rosa.
That was one of my issues with the way that people say like you're attacking 90-something-year-old lady for being a CIA agent. Was like the conspiracy stuff that she's not open to, the stuff that she won't do interviews if she thinks you're a conspiracy person. You see it at the end of Mac's film when he brings up questions he knows people on the conspiracy side are going to want to hear. That was the moment when I was drinking my moonshine and I stood up in my fucking seat. I was like, holy shit, he put out a CIA document to prove. I think when you talk about this type of stuff, these things, is when you start seeing how after that, there's not much of Ruth Paine in the film, because she's now realizing you're not on her side. Which that's suspicion that'll arise. But I say, when we talk about slandering a lady's character or something like that, if you look at all the interviews she does accept, and she's very open to accept, as long as you agree with the official story, where I think in the documentary you put in there too, Max, is that she seems to like the publicity. She seems to be very enjoyment of it if it fits what she likes and what she wants. She does the Dealey Plaza interviews. She does the 6th Floor Museum interviews I've seen on YouTube. She enjoys talking about it, as long as you don't bring up the other points or the things that the conspiracy people say are prime evidence. And I mean, that's just a glorified fucking interview. I could sit here and, pat you guys all on the back and say I love you to death, but I'm interested more in the assassination aspect and your guys' work involved into it. I'm not just going to sit here and give you a complimentary interview, but that's what people want now. And it's not just her, it's other people out there as well too. But you get into an aspect of when you can say like suspicious things about her, you get into this aspect of conspiratorial stuff. I mean, it's not necessarily what people say when you're saying you're attacking a 90-something-year-old lady, because you're not. You're bringing up points or things that you just need clarification on as well, too. I know when we talk about criticisms on your film, I've seen people say, why didn't he ask this question? Well, you're not going to be able to ask every single question. I talked about that with Max's episode. But people are always going to say something that you're not going to be able to think of. But you get into an aspect when they start hating on you and saying you're taking abuse of an elderly lady. It's like, I mean, you could have sat there and had a great session. The first 45 minutes I thought were great. It was going your way. And then you brought different opinion that you knew someone else was going to think out there, a conspiracy side, I would say, about her involvement in the CIA or something like that. And that's when it kind of starts, like, the air gets sucked out of the room. You don't know those interviews unless you've interviewed someone and you've had to ask a tough question like that. It's not easy to deal with on both sides. And it's important stuff. It's especially if you're looking to correct a factual record in history. I mean, this has been an event that's going on 60 years now, that, you know, there's still people that want to know the truth. There's people that say it's closed, and it's not so simple.
Yeah, it was important to me to be respectful of Ruth, in, you know, in my own estimation of what that means. You know, if other people think it's disgraceful slander of an elderly person, that's their right to think something like that. But I took the ethical considerations very seriously, and I also, you know, had to balance offending Ruth with doing right by the importance of this history and getting this stuff on record, and putting these tough questions to her. I think a little bit of discomfort, or people being offended is pretty small in light of the bigger issues here.
She's also a public figure from the beginning. She's made herself a public figure, and that's a legal definition, that if you go out and give TV interviews and public talks, you lose some of your privacy rights, supposedly. I mean, if you do a book on your next door neighbor and say you think he did something, you could get sued because your next door neighbor is a private person, but Ruth Paine is not. She's very visible, and she's very practiced, I think, as an intelligence agent, in my opinion. When she answers these questions, she's got it down pat. And you show a segment of her saying basically the same thing over many years as she gets older, and but she's still sharp as a tack too. I mean, you weren't exploiting an elderly person. You were. She's an important figure in history, and she sees herself that way, and she's fully capable of defending herself. And it's very fascinating.
She's very sharp. She was 82 when I started interviewing her, and she turns 90 this year, in September, I think. And as far as I know, she's still very sharp. I've heard that she has a plan to come to Dallas for the 60th anniversary and do some appearances, talks. I think that, you know, she, at a certain point, she was very respectful of me, and even after that last interview, which got uncomfortable, she was still very civil. Still, I had, you know, exchanges with her, but at a certain point, she said, "I'm done. I don't want to do any more interviews." But she was still nice to me. I saw her in Dallas in 2019 when she came out to do that Sixth Floor Museum appearance and another one for a movie premiere. And so she made it clear to me that she didn't really want to be involved. I think she also said she was done doing interviews in general. I don't know if that's going to be true, but so I have left her alone since then. I thought that was the most respectful thing to do. And yeah, I think my film is more respectful to her in covering the complexity and the controversy than it would be to just, you know, have some totally superficial hagiography of her story that without any mention of this entire, you know, backstory of suspicion and you know, intriguing facts.
It's also true, if you go into an interview and you're just blasting the person, you probably won't get much because they'll shut down. I had an interesting experience. I interviewed DA Henry Wade, who was the DA of Dallas County at the time, very well-known man. He's the Wade in Roe versus Wade, for example. And I decided to start with some softball questions and build up to the good ones. And after about half an hour, he said, "Don't you have any more interesting questions? This is a little dull, you know?" And he said, "Give me some good questions here." And so I started asking him some really sharp questions, and he answered them. He was fairly candid, although I could tell that he was conveniently saying he didn't know this and he didn't know that, or blah blah blah. And I think he knew a lot more than he was admitting. But I got him to admit basically that they didn't have a case against Oswald for killing Kennedy. And Detective Jim Lavelle, who was love giving interviews, told me the same thing, that Captain Will Fritz, the head of homicide, told them both on the evening of the 22nd that they basically didn't have a case against him for killing Kennedy, so work up a case on him for killing Tippit. And that's what they did. They were pushing the Tippit murder. He was never arraigned for the murder of Kennedy. That's something most people don't know. He was arraigned for the murder of Tippit. He was charged with both murders. But I asked Lavelle, I said, what was the difference in the cases? He said, well, with Tippit, we had witnesses. First of all, that implies they didn't have a witness in the Kennedy case. And the one that they claimed, Howard Brennan, proved to be a fairly unreliable witness. But in the Tippit case, it's like Rashomon. There were about 20 people around parts of the scene, and about 10 of them identified Oswald and 10 didn't. They said we couldn't identify him, or there were 2 people involved, or there was a guy who drove off in a car, etc. But even the 10 people, when you look into their stories, they're very questionable witnesses, because at first one guy, Benavides, wouldn't identify him, so they didn't bring him to a lineup. And 3 years later, he identified Oswald to CBS. That's not a very good witness. And other people, the lineups were very flawed. It was obvious who the suspect was. And Helen Markham, their main witness, kept fainting during the interview. Lavelle said he had to keep reviving her with smelling salts. And in her Warren Commission testimony, it's farcical, because she couldn't remember who she identified, and then the interrogator had to give her leading questions. Wasn't it number 2? And, yeah, I guess it was number 2. I don't know. Maybe, I mean, the witnesses are very shaky in that area. And Warren Reynolds was another witness who wouldn't identify the person he saw running away as Oswald. And then in January '64, he was shot in the head in his car lot. And then he suddenly changed his view and said, "Oh yeah, it was Oswald." He survived, fortunately, but he then taught him a lesson. So he said it was Oswald. So the cases, they had very little to go on at all.
I just got 2 questions for Max real quick. Hold on. One, when you did the CIA thing, when you pulled that out, when the interview started getting sour with Rupain, were you like afraid that for a split second she was just going to get up CIA this and snap? No.
I wasn't sure how she was going to react. I thought she might get up and walk off the set, and that would be the end of the interview. She never did. She remained calm. She answered all my questions right until the end. And even after that, we shot a little more B-roll of her playing cards. After that really tense interview, she was able, to let us keep filming. And I told her at the end, I said, thank you for putting up with these questions. I didn't feel like I would be doing my job unless I asked you these questions. And I think she respected that. And, somebody might even speculate that Ruth, wants to answer these questions, or even that some part of her wants the truth to come out, or what, people might speculate that she's under some oath or some pressure not to say what she knows, but she keeps talking because she actually wants it to come out one day, or maybe even subconsciously. Somebody might speculate that.
One good thing about the visual medium I like the way Max lingers on her face in tight close-ups. After she says something, her eyes kind of dart around. And John Ford was asked how to watch a movie. He said, "Look at the eyes. That's where the truth comes out." And she has certain mannerisms that kind of seem to tip the hand that she's prevaricating or that she's not telling the whole truth. But again, it's up to us. She's a tough nut to crack, and I doubt that she'll ever come out and say, "Hey guys, here's the story." It's like I have this fantasy that Dan Rather at age 95 will get up on TV and say, "Okay, folks, here's the truth," But that's never going to happen, probably. But sometimes the truth has to be excavated by people like us between the lines. There's a book, The Yankee and Cowboy War by Carl Oglesby, a terrific book. And he has a brilliant analysis of Jack Ruby's testimony before the Warren Commission. Ruby felt his life was threatened in the Dallas jail and he couldn't tell the whole truth, and begged them to take him to Washington where he would tell the truth, and they wouldn't do it. But Oglesby analyzes the subtleties and the evasions and the double talk. It's just wonderful, but that's kind of what you have to do in this case. People aren't going to blurt things out. Once in a while, people blurt things out. I interviewed a Dallas policeman who was Tippit's oldest friend, Morris Brumley. And while we were talking with my tape recorder in front of us, this restaurant, he pulled out his wallet and showed me his KKK membership card. And, I read it and I was reading all the information into my tape recorder. And then he bragged about how he was a member of the Klan and they went around castrating black men and whipping them and stuff. And I was horrified, but he said he infiltrated the Klan on behalf of the Dallas police. And as another researcher from Dallas told me, infiltrated the Klan, about 3/4 of the Dallas Klan were Dallas policemen. But I finally made a kind of a mistake. I finally said to Brumley, "Well, since you were infiltrating them, didn't you ever report these crimes, any of these crimes?" And then he suddenly shut down. And the trick with interviewing people really is just keep them talking and not throw in these judgmental remarks, because it does close them down to some extent.
You mentioned taking Oswald to go tell the truth, find him to the White House to go say the truth. Is that what
Jack Ruby wanted to go to Washington. He felt, he was in the Dallas County Jail and he was understandably worried they might kill him. And some people think he was killed. His trial was thrown out on procedural grounds, and he was going to have another trial, and he didn't survive to have the trial. He died of cancer, but some people think that was induced. But if he'd gone to Washington, who knows what he would have said. There is a piece of film between sessions of his trial where he says people in high places were involved in what I did, and I could tell you who they are, but
that's in the Warren Commission, is that Jack Ruby, there's apparently alleged statements is what they wrote it as, is that apparently he was warning somebody, he was warning multiple times that about Oswald's death, like someone had gotten to him to do it. Maybe he thought he wasn't the only person that they reached out to go kill Oswald. There was just weird things about him being in debt and then the debt clearing up, and then speculation about buying a second club and everything that was kind of interesting to me.
Yeah, when you get into the case, sorry, Joe. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, actually, this story involves you. A few years ago, Joe sent me a piece of video of a Rabbi Silverman being interviewed, and he said, "Have you ever seen this? What the heck is this?" And I watched it, and then I went down a rabbit hole and ended up writing an article, because I never think of it this way, but Jack Ruby, his real name is Rubenstein. He's Jewish, which, I don't think of Jack Ruby going to temple. Like, it just doesn't compute for me. But he did, and he had the same rabbi as Abraham Zapruder. They both went to temple at the same church, at temple, and Rabbi Silverman was their rabbi. And of course, Rabbi Silverman was allowed to speak to Jack Ruby in prison. And then after Jack Ruby died, Rabbi Silverman, who belonged to a fairly right-wing part, so, like all things, right? When you're talking about Judaism, it's on all sorts of political levels, and there are some very right-wing Jewish folks who support the state of Israel no matter what it does, and that sort of thing. Rabbi Silverman was very much in the line. After Jack Ruby died, he closed shop in Dallas and he moved to Beverly Hills, where he became the father of Jonathan Silverman, the actor from like Weekend at Bernie's and stuff like this. Which, so again, these connections are just like, what? And the reason, part of the reason that Rabbi Silverman was able to get in to see Jack Ruby is because he had met with David Bellin 6 months before the assassination, and they became friends in Israel.
6 months
And
before.
Bellin, 6 months before the assassination, yeah, Bellin had met with Rabbi Silverman. We don't know what that meeting was about or what was discussed. But anyway, 6 months later, he was able to talk to Ruby while he was incarcerated.
Well, it is
so
tragic
just-
that he wasn't allowed to go to Washington, and he may have opened up,
Yeah,
to some extent, but he dropped a lot of clues,
he
Rich,
was trying.
Rich,
Yeah.
you got something to say over there? I feel like you're falling asleep in that little recliner you're in.
You look very
No,
comfortable.
no. Just whenever Joe gets into talking about the Dallas Jewish community, it's like I'm there. I married a Jewish lady, and I converted Reform Judaism, Temple Beth Israel, and so my wife's uncle was Abraham Zapruder's business partner, Erwin Schwartz, who went to the same temple that Rabbi Silverman had been a rabbi at. He wasn't there any longer, but I know very well the story about Jonathan Silverman and all that. Those connections keep popping up, and they do blow your mind. But I saw them all around me. I saw them in my extended family, and I talked to people who were Erwin's age and my in-laws' age, who knew Silverman, who knew Ruby. Erwin Schwartz knew Jack Ruby. Erwin told me everybody who worked downtown knew Jack Ruby. That's how much he got around. Earl Cabell, for instance, knew Jack Ruby.
The mayor.
Yeah. The mayor at the time, brother of Charles Cabell. We'll just remind everyone again. One of the three men Kennedy fired over the Bay of Pigs. And oh man, and Joe knows, because he's read some recent essays I've written where I've found astounding connections with all kinds of things like that.
Wait,
You mentioned Carl Oglesby. That's in the last essay in my book. The connections between Hillary Clinton and Carl Oglesby. And I finally was able to write that story before the 2016 election. It didn't get published before the election. We tried, but it's just so. And people have told me that if they had read that essay before the election, they would have voted for Hillary Clinton.
One way to research things, and this is what law enforcement does too, is you go from the periphery, getting closer and closer. So I've interviewed a lot of people whose names are unknown, who had some connection. And you learn a lot that way. You learn surprising things. And one thing you do as a researcher is don't go in with preconceptions. I remember somebody at the American Film Institute once told me, when they're doing oral histories, a bad interviewer will be talking to a director and he'll say, 1923, that was the year I killed my wife and buried her in the garden. And the interviewer will look at his notes and say, okay, 1924, you made Wild Sparrows, right? Like not hearing what the person is saying. You got to really be willing to hear things that you don't expect. And then you gradually, those people often turn out to be very important people. And nobody had interviewed Mr. Edgar Tippit, Tippit's father, except for the FBI briefly. They did a perfunctory interview with him. But he was sitting there in East Texas, 90 years old, very sharp as a tack. He was still working as a farmer, very nice man. And it was a very poignant interview. Like he told me, I said, what did you feel when Oswald was shot? And he said, I felt so terrible, because I wanted to hear the whole truth. And he didn't have any vengeance factor or anything. He was an interesting man. And that interview was quite remarkable. I didn't know what to expect, but it was great.
Well, I think Deborah Conway in the Searchers film talks about that when is it her grandma or her mother that saw Oswald get killed, talked about how now they're never going to like get an answer. There's never going to be a trial. And it's like saying that maybe at a young age, you don't soak in what that means, but then you realize, yeah, it's going to be this, there's going to be no answer. There's going to be no conclusion on it. It's going to be this thing that's going to linger. Randy, you can probably, I'm right about that. It's his grandma, right?
Yeah. It was Deborah's grandmother, and they were living in South Louisiana at the time. And she mentioned that her grandmother was very politically astute in saying that there would never be a trial. So it would be difficult for any of the truth to come out.
You interviewed so many great early people like Salandria and Mark Lane and several people who are no longer with us. And it's very valuable to have those people on record. Those are the people, I mean, to me, I think the only heroes of this case are the civilian witnesses who bravely come forward, like Aquila Clemens, Marianne Moorman. I dedicate the book to them and to some of those early researchers who blazed the trail and got attacked and vilified, and you really paid them justice, I thought, in your interviews. So thank you.
I always hear the point that the Warren Commission was thorough. I agree to that. I really do. But I think it was thorough in the wrong way. They were interviewing people that like weren't going to have a fucking clue on anything. Like they were like Jack Ruby's niece, who was twice removed into a different family and moved, 4 states away or 5 countries over. And it's like, why is this person like, why are they in like, but I was looking through and I was like, they were very thorough in their investigation. I mean, there were names of things I wouldn't have even thought of that they were reaching out to. Did you know this person? Talk to a barber shop person, talk to this and this, all this back and forth. But I'm like, well, so you didn't interview Tippit's dad? You didn't interview and that's the weird thing about the JFK assassination is that as LinkedIn as Tippit is, people consider like that's like a red herring. That's like out there in the distance. It can't really be explained. And it's kind of like that could be a crucial piece as well, too. As much as I think Jack Ruby's a crucial piece, I started looking at all of his investments after Oswald's death. There was a lot of things that just didn't spark normal about this person that they try to make him out to be. Even got me to the point where when I looked into Oswald again, instead of thinking that he was Central Intelligence, I started going to the point of maybe he was a wannabe Central Intelligence agent. I understand that the CIA could burn files and they have destroyed a lot of evidence. We've seen that through plenty of documents and documents that we don't have as well, too, where there are statements about even in medical autopsies where they burn their notes to not be objects of mere speculation or cure morbid curiosity or something like that. But when I was looking at the CIA files in the 2021 release, there is a statement from some agent named Dimitru who talked about giving an interview for someone who was a radio person in Minsk. Worked at a radio factory who had military, and that's Oswald's profile. But then there's no documentation of that. And you have a research board that is asking, where's that documentation? They say they don't have any files. I mean, CIA is not lying. They're being honest. They just fucking destroyed it. You just
a lot of the problem in researching the case is that some witnesses were killed or intimidated, and a lot of documents were destroyed or altered. A lot of things have been altered in the case, including Kennedy's body. And so you have to be extremely skeptical of any single piece of information or whatever you get. But Oswald, I found, had spoken to the FBI in Dallas at least 3 times in November of '63 before the assassination. And that's remarkable. And Henry Wade told me Oswald talked to the FBI the day before. And I said, the day before? He said, well, a day or 2 before. And that's remarkable. And then I found out he talked to them on November 16th. That was actually in the Dallas Morning News the day Oswald was shot, before Oswald was shot. And then November 12th, approximately, Oswald came into the FBI office to leave what they called a threatening note. But I believe he infiltrated the plot as an FBI informant. He didn't realize he was going to be blamed for it. So I think that was his main role. But the CIA definitely sent him to Russia and set him up and constructed what we call a legend around him, to make himself look like a communist agent, which he was not.
Could I add something to that? When we talk about the CIA did it, could it be possible that you have rogue individuals in the CIA who choose to go after someone like Oswald and take him on as like a protege? I mean, James Angleton is a great example of someone that could easily be one of these individual characters that could spark up this type of thing, because there's a lot of the CIA that seemed like inside the CIA, they were acting on their own accord. Alan Dulles is a great example as well.
Well, you're talking about some of the highest people in the agency, the Dulles and Angleton, so when you start saying rogue, it almost sounds, people use that sometimes as kind of an excuse to not blame the agency per se. But when you get into the high level people, or even the lower level people who have been proven to be involved with the Oswald file or hiding elements of it or whatever, it wasn't just a handful of nutty former agents or something. It was some key people. And
you've gotten into some key areas here that have some caveats. When I've thought about whether or not it was rogue agents, whether or not it was the CIA officially, you can actually say truthfully, the CIA did not kill Kennedy, because you're talking about the government institution. As an institution, no. In fact, Alan Dulles, who we suspect strongly was one of the top conspirators, he was no longer with the CIA. Of course, that's kind of fuzzy because he had a lot of loyalists still at CIA. E. Howard Hunt, for one. Certainly Angleton. Angleton ran the mole hunting area, which was termed the CIA within the CIA. I mean, if you're hunting for a mole in your own agency, a lot of people don't know what you're doing, and so there was a perfect place to run Oswald from, because they could keep. But I think what we're dealing with here is loyalists inside and outside the CIA to Alan Dulles. Dulles was able to control this wide, because he had been CIA director for the last 10 years before he was fired. And of course, the day of the assassination, we've traced him to the farm, the CIA training facility, where he spent that day waiting for the news.
Yeah, I was going to say David Talbot found that out in his book on Dulles, that he was at the farm that weekend where, he was kind of running his shadow agency, even though he had been fired, and was heavily involved. He had been in Dallas a few weeks before the assassination as well. And, he's a very powerful man, had his hand in all kinds of things, and had all the connections that you could possibly want. So it's kind of a mood issue, whether it was official or unofficial or whatever. But, a lot of these medium level people who really run agencies too. I mean, I found that I did a TV show for the USIA on the Polish Solidarity movement. And I found out the top guy in the agency was a Reagan appointee who didn't know anything about anything. He was a movie producer who made Snow White and the Three Stooges. He was kind of an amiable fool. But the number two guy was a brilliant man who really ran the agency. And that's kind of true in most government agencies, that the lower level people who stay with the agency for a long time are really the people who are most effective. And so I think some of them were involved in the Oswald case. And John Newman's books on Oswald are really helpful in that regard. He's really studied that aspect in great detail. One thing I'll mention, one reason I got into Tippit was I began thinking, well, why didn't the Warren Commission really investigate Tippit? Why didn't the FBI? Why didn't HSCA they turned up some good things, but they left a lot of questions. So I thought there's something odd there that they're not going into. I think that's another huge red flag when some big important part of the case is ignored. And
Oh, I was gonna mention earlier that Tippit's daughter graduated from high school with my little brother, so I overlapped with her my senior year. I didn't know her, but she knows my brother. And when Facebook came along, and we were all on Facebook, she actually sent me a friend request, and I communicated with her a little bit about that. She said, I noticed that your profile picture, you're standing in Dealey Plaza. You're obviously interested in the assassination. And she came right out and said that I believe that Oswald acted alone. I don't think my father was involved in any way. I think that Oswald killed him. And so that sort of framed the whole situation. And I did not accept her friend request. I said, I don't think you're going to want to talk to me. It sounds like you don't want to talk to me, but I wish you well. And there's that, I had a chance to talk to Curtis Tippit in the years after high school. He was only a year behind me in my high school. And a good friend of mine was a good friend of his. And I would ask him if I could talk to Curtis about the subject. And he would tell me that Curtis doesn't want to talk to people about it.
It's funny,
So-
I talked to Curtis. There was a 90th birthday tribute to Tippit in Dallas, and I went to it at the 6th floor museum. They had Mrs. Tippit and their surviving children. And I went over to Mrs. Tippit, who I had tried to interview for my book, Into the Nightmare. I sent her a registered letter and she didn't respond. But I went over to her and had a very nice little chat with her. And I said, could I come and interview you tomorrow? I'm in town. And she seemed very willing to do it. And then Gary Mack, who was, leading the cover up in Dallas, the head of the museum, came over, started signaling frantically this policeman who was Mrs. Tippit's minder. And the guy came over and intervened. And he said, well, I set up her interviews and I'll get back to you. Of course, he never did. But then I went over and talked to Curtis. And he seemed like a very nice man and very open to talking. And we were starting to have a good chat. And then the same policeman saw this. He came over and literally grabbed him by the arm and yanked him away without saying anything. Get it out of the way here, So the Dallas police have kept a tight rein on the Tippit family. And the fact that Marie Tippit was not interviewed by the Warren Commission or the HSCA did do a brief interview with her, but there's very little on the record from her, but she gave some magazine interviews and things. For example, she said that JD came home for lunch around the time of the assassination, but she gave various accounts that are contradictory or have different times, etc. And I found that very interesting, and I really wanted to find out more about that. But that's one of those areas that is hard to ascertain because there are things where people won't talk, or Mrs. Tippit has since died. So there are gaps in our knowledge that we keep trying to fill.
Does it seem not more suspicious when someone can keep the same story for so long?
Well, yes and no. I mean, Max did that with Ruth, but Ruth Payne is, I think, a trained operative. Mrs. Tippit is not. But her story kept changing, over the years, and I find that suspicious when stories change too. But it can be suspicious when stories don't change too, like when Max finds that she uses the same language year after year after year. That's indicative of following a script, or you could say she's just being honest if you want to take that point of view. As Mark Twain said, it's always better to tell the truth because you don't have to remember what you said before, But,
exactly. You mentioned earlier also about this phrase keeps coming up that there will never be a trial. We had 3 murders that weekend: Kennedy, Tippit, and Oswald. Now, there's no statute of limitations for murder. And at the very least, family members at any time, any further generations down the line, can bring a wrongful death lawsuit, civil court. That's some of the areas that we are very optimistic about at the Center for Deep Political Research.
Good
we
luck
have
with
several
that.
projects that we've proposed. I am aware, Rachel Oswald, Lee's daughter, worked at the Texas Chili Parlor, a little restaurant in downtown Austin. She was a waitress there for many years while she was working her way through college. She was in nursing school at the University of Texas. And she eventually graduated. I didn't contact her directly, and I did go to the restaurant, and she did wait on me, and I did tip her well, but I didn't let on. I didn't want to hassle her. I empathize very much with the Oswald family because they have to bear this stigma, especially the kids. Whatever or whoever Marguerite was, and Robert and the other family members and Lee. And there's a very good case to be made that they were also CIA. The kids, I don't think so. Marina may very well have been KGB. So you have to be careful there as well. But Rachel played softball. Was a big enthusiast in the women's softball leagues in Austin. I found out things about her. And I taught an informal class at the University of Texas for a while on the assassination right after JFK came out in '92. I was teaching that class. And through intermediaries, I was in contact with Rachel about possibly coming and speaking to the class. Never happened, but I sort of through other, the grapevine in Austin, you run into people, you bring up this subject, they say, oh, a friend of mine is in the same classes at Austin Community College with Rachel's two sons. Lee Oswald has two grandsons who are in college, if not graduated by now. They could be the instigators of a civil case, wrongful death. The Tippit family could bring a wrongful death civil case. We could get this back in the court. We could get the evidence out and possibly, make a real difference. Not just, we're in a comfort zone. It's very comforting to rehash all of this. I think for a lot of the younger generation, they may even see it as entertainment. But no, these people were murdered and their families have suffered from it. How would you like all of this hoopla to have blown up around a murdered family member of your own? At CDPR, we have lots of other projects. You talk about, altering Kennedy's body. Well, where is Kennedy's body? They exhumed Oswald. We haven't talked about that yet. I haven't heard you talk to anyone about that. Did you know that Oswald was exhumed? He was exhumed in 1980.
I'm going to be honest. I don't know what exhumed means.
They dug him up.
Oh, well, I knew that. They got his fingerprints.
No. That was done before they buried him. In 1980, they dug up his body because a huge controversy had developed around a book that had come out. It was about the double Oswald situation. And the question came up. I think the author had actually claimed that it's the wrong Oswald in the grave. So they managed to get the legal permission to dig up Oswald. They had a forensic analysis done, all on the record. And there's some very strange things about it. Paul Grudy, who was the funeral director who buried Oswald, was privy to it. He got to see the body when they exhumed him and said that he did not see the incision. He didn't see any where they had taken, they in an autopsy, they removed the scalp. They removed the skull at the top. They cut through the skull, and he saw no evidence that had been done. There were other discrepancies. The teeth. The forensic pathologists showed pictures of the corpse's teeth. And I don't know if you know the story about Oswald losing a tooth in high school. There's a famous picture where he's like clowning around it in class. They took a picture of him with the missing tooth. He had gotten into a fight with a couple of big burly guys, and they knocked his tooth out. But when they exhumed this body, a full set of natural front teeth. So to me, that is proof.
You know, when you mentioned exhuming Kennedy, that would be valuable because it could solve some of the problems about the
That is
autopsy.
one of the projects. That's one of the projects we want to push for. I proposed it in my proposal for our think tank, which is in my book, The Gordian Knot. I raised that as one of the directions we can go. We can also exhume, when we tried, when John Connolly died in 1994, some researchers went public and said, they held press conferences and said, you know, we need permission to, well, before they bury him, they tried to get the lead removed from the wrist and the thigh, because the claim has been made, and I think it's correct, through x-rays that have been taken, there is more remaining lead in Connolly than is missing from CE-399, the supposed murder bullet. The family, you know, had that ridicule aspect. Of course, the CIA was all for this because of 1035-960. They immediately jumped on the researchers who were asking legitimate questions and had legitimate reason to remove these elements from Connolly before they buried him. And they jumped on them and said, crazy conspiracy theorists, how dare they? You know, how dare they disrespect Governor Connolly? And they shut it down.
I was one of the people who was urging that because it was very important, and I got attacked for that the same way you mentioned. But, you know, it's probably very unlikely the Kennedy family would allow JFK's body to be exhumed. Although I will mention Zachary Taylor, one of our early presidents, his body was exhumed in 1991 because there were some theories that he may have been poisoned, but they claimed, they autopsied him again, they claimed he wasn't, but there is a precedent, but that was a long time.
Yeah, Zachary Taylor exhumed for a forensic investigation of the body, suspicion of murder. So that's a great precedent. Abraham Lincoln's body was exhumed 4 times because of questions of whether or not his body was still there.
Yeah, they opened the coffin many years later after he died, when they finally buried him in a very heavy vault. They opened the coffin to let people look at it, and I think there was a young kid who was there who gave a report later on what he saw, and it looked like Abraham Lincoln, and he was well preserved. They said he'd been embalmed many times during that long train ride. But the Kennedy family has largely been obstacles to researchers, except for Robert Kennedy Jr. Who is,
yes, I was going to say I don't think we should be so intransigent about the Kennedy family, because Robert Kennedy is now one of us, and I would say that many of the Kennedy family have researched this thoroughly as well as we have. They know as much as we do. I think Caroline, definitely. I saw an interview with her and her brother, John Kennedy, on Brinkley's Sunday show back after JFK came out. And they had John and Caroline on. And it was about, you know, Profiles and Courage Award and, you know, pedestrian stuff like that. But at the end of the interview, Brinkley, because of the hoopla in 92 over JFK, Brinkley just threw out this question, sort of snickering about it. Have you ever paid any attention to any of these documentaries, you know, conspiracy documentaries? And both Caroline and John got very serious at that moment on camera. And they said, and John said, a lot of them are pretty accurate. And then Brinkley cut away at that point. But that told me that, yeah, of course the Kennedy family, Robert Kennedy knew exactly what had happened and investigated it, but very secretly, very privately. I think the Kennedy family has done that. And now that Robert is out in the open, he's come out as one of us. I don't think we should be as pessimistic about exhuming Kennedy's body. Boy, talk about the backlash that we'll get from CIA and state if that actually comes. If we push for that and come close to it being a reality, boy, we haven't seen fireworks like that in decades.
I'm in the same boat as you. I mean, I spent, after my talk with Max on his episode, when he talked about having Marina's cell phone number, I mean, I went on Facebook hours later that night, just looking through, trying to find living family members, if anybody had a Facebook account, if anybody had Instagram, if anybody had any contact. Then I came across an interview of Marina Oswald's daughter talking about the assassination and saying that she didn't think her dad did it. I mean, you look at, like, from what I've heard, the Harper fragment, that last little bullet, the last little skull fragment from Kennedy, the last person who was seen to have it was Berkeley. And then it was just gone. The family physician was the last person that had it. There's a lot of stuff where there's no reason. I mean, there's reason for, like, the younger generation, sure, of the families to come out and do something. But even when Connolly was hit with that magic bullet or hit with whatever, they could have easily just checked parts of his bone, and they wanted to do another check on his body, but she said no, and she denied it. I mean, these people, they've been dealing with this for so long. At this point, they just want it buried and gone. I mean, it makes an issue when crucial evidence comes
Let me
out,
just say, there's an interview I found with a guy who was a Capitol Hill insider who had his own newsletter, and he was involved with the Democratic Party, and he invited Governor Connolly and his wife to a fundraiser, and he asked Connolly about the assassination. Connolly always said the single bullet theory was not correct. He was hit by a different bullet from the one that hit Kennedy, you know. And but anyway, Connolly said, I've always believed there's a conspiracy, and I don't accept the Warren Commission. And this man said, well, why haven't you said that publicly? And he said, because I love our country and I don't want to cause any more pain, you know, et cetera. But you know, I asked the question, like, what is really loving your country? To me, is knowing the truth about our country and facing the truth and trying to deal with it so it doesn't keep happening as it does. But Connolly, there are many people like that privately doubted the official theory, but Robert Kennedy, for example, Sr. was a doubter from the beginning, and he and Jacqueline Kennedy had an emissary to Moscow the week after the assassination. Their friend William Walton was going there for a pre-planned conference about the artists. They're going to have an artist exchange between the U.S. and the USSR. And they told him to pass along a message that they didn't believe that it was a single gunman, and they thought that it was a right-wing conspiracy. They were convinced. They wanted that message passed to the Soviets because they were being blamed in some circles, and the Kennedys wanted to say, we don't blame you, or we don't blame Cuba. And, you know, but why didn't they go public? That's another big question. I mean, you have to be concerned and sympathetic about the danger to the Kennedy family and their children, you know, from if they had really openly challenged the case. But now you get into the later generations where Robert Kennedy's a very outspoken person, and he gets discounted because he's an anti-vaccine person. And but you know, people have different views, but they were in Dallas doing a live event. It's not clear why it was never televised, but it was reported by the Associated Press that they both said they thought it was a conspiracy, and their father never believed the Warren Commission. He thought they did a terrible job, you know, et cetera. So they said that publicly, which is remarkable.
So we have the 60th anniversary coming up in, you know, a year or so. I wasn't there for the 50th anniversary, but you know, the question is, you know, what are people trying to do? What's the goal here? Is I like what I hear Richard talking about. There's, you know, you have concrete plans, and you're trying to get to the bottom of this, you know, make some actual substantive progress or have an impact. I know people with the Truth and Reconciliation Committee a few years ago said, you know, they tried to put out this joint statement and try to have some impact, but it seems like this is still always so marginalized. Is there any plan for the 60th anniversary? And those of you who were involved with the 50th and saw what happened, can you strategize to do something and have an impact for the 60th?
I was at the 50th, but that was a real debacle because they closed Dealey Plaza. You had to apply to Homeland Security to get a pass to go to this ceremony they had, and I didn't even bother, but it was a bitterly cold day, and they had hundreds of police officers ringing the area around Dealey Plaza a block away. That's as close as you could get. And I looked at the faces of the police officers, and a lot of them looked really embarrassed, and they felt this is ridiculous that the public wasn't allowed at Dealey Plaza. And they had this ceremony where the mayor basically was trying to exonerate Dallas from any responsibility. That was the agenda, I think. And they had David McCullough speaking, who was a very corrupt, very famous biographer who's fabricated stories in his biographies and been caught doing it. He's a member of Skull and Bones, and he was the main speaker.
Holy
and
shit, Skull and Bones.
Yeah, he gave us a ridiculous speech in which he just basically quoted a lot of JFK's famous quotes and didn't really discuss the matter at hand. It was a worthless speech. But that was, it showed how protective they are, and how Dallas, that's why they run the 6th floor museum as a propaganda outlet to say that it's a lone gunman, etc. At least they haven't torn down that building. There was some talk years before that. But Richard, so what is, I'll throw it back to you because you're in that area there. Are there some concrete plans building up for the 60th?
No, not on our side that I know of. You can add the Truth and Reconciliation Committee to and their petition to failed efforts. My essay, The Gordian Knot, is about 54 years of failures. Why 54 years of revelations have failed to make a difference was the subtitle. And we keep adding to that. We keep repeating the same things. We keep having mock trials. As great as the recent films are, I haven't seen them make a difference. I keep hoping. And I think that the other side is going to have us wrapped around their little finger again with the 60th anniversary coming up. David Mamet, I don't know if you've heard about his new film that he's involved in, which is going to be about, he's in touch with Sam Giancana's or extended family members, grandsons and such, who have they've written a script, and it's been getting some publicity lately. And they're going to do this film. So we're going to be back in that old debate, which was resolved. Garrison resolved it. It's resolved very well in the film JFK. And they probably, I haven't seen the 4-hour version, but I saw JFK Revisited. And, it's done. But a lot of people, I keep running into people who believe that Agent Greer, the driver of the limousine, shot Kennedy.
I saw that too.
As pervasive. That is as pervasive as Kennedy had an affair with Marilyn Monroe. It's nonsense. And it came from, I'm blanking on the guy's name, who wrote the book.
Anthony Summers?
Riders on a Pale Horse. No, Riders on a Pale Horse. Bill, I'm blanking on the name, but the guy who became a famous conspiracy theorist, but a wacko one. And
Fetzer?
No. Well, this is before. This is the grandfather of all those guys.
Well, I'll tell you, my mentor in this case, and many people were mentored by him, is Penn Jones, the great Dallas. He had a small newspaper outside Dallas, and he was very, broke a lot of ground by interviewing witnesses and turning up all kinds of interesting evidence. And he collected his articles into a series of books called Forgive My Grief. But I got to know him I went down there, and every year he would lead a ceremony on the grassy knoll. This is before the Dallas people took it over. Penn would recite a prayer and give a little speech, and everybody would talk to him. So I went up to him in '83 and I became friendly with him. And I knew in later years his memory deteriorated, but he was. But anyway, he told me. I said, well, first of all, he said, I didn't realize there was a conspiracy until the Sunday after, when Oswald was shot. He said, that's how naive I was. I love that quote. But he also said, I said something about, do you ever think we'll solve the case? This is back in '83 when I was kind of getting into the deep research. And he said, well, I think I and a bunch of friends basically solved the case in the mid-'60s. And that's basically kind of true. And Vincent Salandria, as some of you know, I mean, he was really on top of it. He was a lawyer in Philadelphia, and he was a very shrewd, precise legal mind. And he wrote some early articles that really solved and discredited a lot of the sillier theories, et cetera. So, and Sylvia Maher's book, Accessories After the Fact in 1967, really demolished the Warren Report. So it's not like these things have not been known for a long time. It's that the media keep obfuscating them, to throw out these false stories like that Sam Giancana's relative shot him or whatever. And just to muddy the waters. That's one of their main techniques.
Well, you get into a position like me where I got into the first, obviously, investigation by talking to Jefferson Morley, then talking to Jim DiEugeno, and then I'm talking about it at work, and people are just giving me the eye roll to a point where it's like how controversial of a topic this is, to where someone at work pulled me aside, goes, try not to talk about conspiratorial stuff at work. And I'm like, first of all, there is a conspiracy behind it, but this is like real stuff. And if we don't talk about history, how are we ever going to get the facts straight on what that is? And it's just, you saw a lot of older generations, people that generally might have cared at one point, just stop caring and roll their eyes at it. Gets chalked into the whole UFO topic as well, too. I mean, there's even a book with UFO and JFK, where that's no validity in that book, but there's aspects that these things get tied together. And to mention what you said about Penn Jones, I mean, that's in Randy's film. About with the searchers, John Judge took it over, and they do a moment of silence in the film for at Dealey Plaza and everything for Kennedy. I mean, I think it's interesting. I think it shows a different perspective than what the news is reporting. The news reporting are just glossing over the fact that there's, not a lot of people that believe conspiracy. But then you watch Randy's film and you see all the people lined up that are generally there. I mean, people that were alive when it happened, and their kids are also like getting asked questions like, who's your favorite president? They're like, John F. Kennedy. Necessarily do they know at 6 and 7 what great things John F. Kennedy did? Probably not, but I mean, their parents got them interested in it, and hopefully that's going to breed on some new researchers as well, too. I just think you need to have a healthy take on all of this. I mean, I think you see a lot of generally passionate people invested into wanting true information to come out, things that get chalked up to conspiracy, which have enough weight in it. That means the Texas oil companies being involved. It means all that stuff, whether you believe it or not. There's weight behind everything people grab straws at. And I think the whole point of this is, if you generally care about history, if you generally care about the country that you're living in, you also have to admit when there was a mistake. You have to admit when you've went down a bad road. I mean, William Colby is the best example of that. Any article you look up about William Colby and Watergate says the CIA would never recover from this. This was a blow to their reputation. And that is current directors talking about that as well, too. Official statements quoting that we'd never recover from this. The institution would never recover from this. We gotta get over that idea that people are so sensitive. I mean, our attention spans are like this right now.
Well, I think one of the reasons we're in such a terrible state in the country now, where half the country believes one set of facts and half the country believes a bunch of delusions, stems directly from the Kennedy assassination, in my opinion. Most people date that loss of trust and confusion to the Vietnam War expansion, which started happening in '65. And that did cause a massive disenchantment and disbelief in the government. But the Kennedy assassination had started that process in '63. And a Gallup poll right after the assassination indicated a lot of people didn't believe Oswald acted alone. And there's been tremendous skepticism all through the years. Usually about 70% of the public doesn't believe the official story. And recently it declined a bit to about 60%. But I think that's when the schism opened up, and Watergate exacerbated that, and Iran-Contra and 9/11, all these things, to the point the public doesn't believe the mainstream media, which in some ways healthy, but in other ways it's dangerous because they put out a lot of false propaganda. But then there's the whole alternative media, such as this show and many podcasts. Podcasts are a great way to discuss issues in depth. They don't maybe reach as many people as if you went on 60 Minutes or something. That's one problem. It reaches a limited audience, but it gets out there, and the internet is a great way to spread things. And you could, as I say, publish books independently and make these films, and they're there for the record, and young people can watch them. And I think all these films are extremely valuable. And film is a great medium to reach people. I mean, even Lenin said that back in the 20s, that motion pictures were the best form of reaching the public, and young people are into films and visual things. So I think it's hopeful in that sense. But I think facing the facts, even if you don't wind up prosecuting somebody or whatever, it may be too late in some cases, but just accepting the reality of things is the first step to curing our country's problems. You look at the difficulty a lot of people have accepting the fact that Trump lost the election because they keep getting hammered by false stories on Fox and other things. But a lot of people are hammered by the New York Times and the Washington Post and other outlets that Oswald killed Kennedy. You still just read that flatly stated in a lot of the media. And I'll just mention, I have a relative who said to me a few years ago, she said, after I talked to her about some of this stuff, she said, I don't know how you could live with this kind of knowledge, and it's very scary to me. I couldn't live with that. And so I don't think about that stuff. And I think that's a common attitude for a lot of people, is I just don't want to know. It's too disturbing to our entire framework and way of life, as somebody says in Dr. Strangelove, that
Well, that's the attitude that the citizens of Germany had in the 1930s.
Yeah, we
And
don't want to know.
John Judge wrote an excellent essay, which you can find online, called "The Good Americans," referencing what the so-called good Germans who didn't want to know. I call that the avoidance. I deal with that every day. I deal with it in my family, my extended family that I was talking about. It's a very, for some people, it's a very personal, it affected them personally, people who were directly involved in some way with the assassination. And they deal with it through avoidance. But there's also a national avoidance, because, to face this truth is to tear down everything and rebuild it. I think that's what has to be done. I agree with you, Joe, that's what, we're not going to be healthy again. John Judge said it best. If you want a democracy, you have to resolve the Kennedy assassination. And I keep saying that. Nothing else is going to work. That's the first domino. There are other dominoes down the line that could knock them over and maybe get the same result at the end. But the domino that's already leaning and ready to fall over is ours, because we've spent the most time pushing it. And they're so desperate. They know that. Our enemies know that. And they're so desperate to keep a lid on it. That's why Mammoth's film is going to have huge funding, and there's going to be more, pro-Warren Commission stuff, which is ridiculous, because all the Warren commissioners came out and said, yeah, we were lying.
Well, there was a film a few years ago called Parkland, which got a lot of publicity, and it was
exactly.
But it was a terrible movie, and hardly anybody went to it, so it didn't make much impact. But I think Max was holding up. Is that Schatz's book, Martin Schatz?
Yeah, this is Martin Schatz's book, "History Will Not Absolve Us." And if you want to look into the issue of psychological denial, this is a key book, and he's somebody you might want to bring on your show. He's kind of a hardliner, but he's a real insightful, interesting guy.
I found that book very valuable. He's a psychiatrist, and I was vexed for a long time by this problem of how could the American public kind of know that the official story was wrong and not do anything about it. That really bothered me. And he answers that question. He said that there is a form of knowing, but then there's a form of doing something about it, which is there's a huge step involved from one to the other, and most people are not willing to take this step, because then they would have to admit all kinds of terrible things about their country and some culpability of their own gullibility, et cetera. And Schatz goes into that syndrome. It makes perfect sense to me that to do something about it is to accept responsibility. And a lot of people don't want to accept responsibility for, we all have to be responsible for our democracy. That becomes more and more clear every day. And Schatz really analyzes that very precisely, and Salandria too. And they were, they have letters back and forth too. And it's a really terrific book. I recommend that too.
Well, it's like, I mean, there's like 10 other people I still want to talk to. They don't have contact info out there. And it kind of sucks, because even like with like, I want to speak to Marina Oswald. I doubt she's going to be willing to, but even if it's off air, like I just need it for myself. Like, I know it's not necessarily, I mean, it would be awesome to get an interview like that on a podcast, sure, and have it recorded. But at the same time, I'm just generally interested in the case. I mean, Grover is his name. Am I saying his name right? He's one I want to talk to. John Newman's one I want to talk to. Brian Edwards is one I want to talk to. I don't think Mike Chester wants to talk to me. But
Randy has a whole list, a big long list.
I mean,
but you got Robert Kennedy Jr. coming on, but you should talk to Martin Schatz. I'm sure he's reachable and available. I don't know him, but he wrote this fine book, and he probably, people like that are worth
And
looking
Robbie, Martin Schatz was on the ground in Dallas that weekend with Vince Salandria investigating all this. He was Vince Salandria's buddy, doing that with him. So he's the closest interview you can get to Salandria himself.
well, wrapping up here, because we've been going for 2 hours. I want you guys to be able to promote your stuff as well too. Also, when you say these names, you gotta follow through with sending me the contact information, because I'm end up looking on Facebook for 4 hours at these people. Some of them are in the education forums. I found some of those freaking names that were talking trash. I found their little pseudonyms, and then I found their real names. And I'm like, oh, I got you now. But yeah, that's a personal event.
Well, a lot of these people are professors somewhere, or practitioners of, like a psychiatrist. You could track them down that way.
Then why are they arguing over a fucking jacket on the education forums? I don't get it. What is that? To me, that's nothing.
To waste your time. They do to waste your time. I've been trying.
All right.
Because they will wear you down.
Yeah. Flooding the zone with, somebody pointed out they bring up a lot of questions that have been solved long ago, just to muddy the waters and just kind of keep people distracted, and it's called weapons of mass distraction. The media do that, but they also have these people that appear on forums, and they seem to be, for whatever reason, that's their mission, is to distract people and confuse people and raise issues, and they ignore so much research. And then the researchers have to point out, well, back in '67, Sylvia Maher just, shot that point down, but they ignore that kind of thing, and they act like it's never been asked before. That's one of the ways they take up our time.
Weapons of
mass distraction. I didn't coin that term, but somebody wrote a book with that title, I believe.
Weapons of mass distraction or weapons of self-destruction. I don't know. You be the judge. Guys, I'm gonna let you guys promote your links and everything. My goal is to get like a 20-person panel. That would be excellent. I have to move on to the RFK assassination at some point. I'm seeing so many like notes of JFK and RFK linked together. I get it. Like you could say, I don't know about that, but just similar tactics that might have aged a couple of years or so, I started noticing. But I'm going to let the two filmmakers go first. I'm going to let Max go with his documentary. I'm going to let Randy go. And I'm going to let McBride. You can say your book's Political Truth, and I'm going to blank. You have a long title on the Tippit one. And then
Into the Nightmare.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. And then Richard, you can promote yours as well too. And then I'll wrap us up. Max.
All right. So my film is called The Assassination and Mrs. Payne. The website is jfkpaine.com, Paine. And I'm also on Twitter and Facebook. My handle is JFK Panel. My film's available on iTunes, Amazon, Vimeo, a bunch of different places online. And it will be playing at the San Antonio Film Festival on August 6th. I'll be there to do a Q&A, and Joe Green will be there with me.
Randy?
That's so cool, Max. You can find everything, searchers at the film's website, thesearchersfilm.com. And there are links to the Facebook, all social media there.
Joe?
Yeah, I have the two books, Into the Nightmare, My Search for the Killers of President John F. Kennedy and Officer J.D. Tippit, came out in 2013, available through Amazon, self-published, and Political Truth, The Media and the Assassination of President Kennedy, which came out in December 2021. That's available on Amazon, and that's a very long book that I'm very proud of. It's kind of a spin-off from the earlier one. And I also did 2 episodes that I mentioned of 50 Reasons for 50 Years, Leno Sanek's excellent series, which is well worth watching the whole thing. If somebody wants to get up to speed on all the different aspects, people did like 6, 7, 10-minute videos on many aspects. It's a great primer on the case. A lot of them are on YouTube and some are on Vimeo, and you can search around. And I did one on the Tippit case, another one on the media and the assassination, which is also called Political Truth.
You got 2 episodes on my show too.
Yeah.
Put that on your resume.
Yeah.
My book is Deep State in the Heart of Texas, and it's published by Joe Green's publishing company, Say Something Real Press. You can find info about me in the book there as well. You can find my essay on the 2016 election at joegreenjfk.com, just to help out Joe, who had to leave. And I think that soon we're going to have some, at least rudimentary version of our former large website at CDPR, cdpresearch.net, or no, .org, cdpresearch.org. And we have coming up, Robbie did a panel discussion with the 5 of us CDPR.
You got to talk
founders.
past tense. This is gonna be after that.
Right. So there should be a rudimentary website up for that.
I better get
forgot to mention-
on that.
Sorry, I forgot to mention I have a website at intothenightmare.com, which is articles and interviews about that book. And I hadn't gotten around to a website on Political Truth, and my personal website expired. I was so busy last year. I did 4 books and I ran out of time. But the internet is a fantastic tool until they try to shut it down. But it's a great way to spread information. Sort of niche audiences can find things on the internet, and just by Googling any of these topics, you find a lot of good stuff. You find some disinformation as well, but you have to learn, when you study this case, really important how to separate the disinformation from things that are real. You have to, what I do is I compare many sources before I give credibility to anything and check them out and have a critical view. And I teach my students that how to read the media critically is very important.
Rich, anytime you want to sign me up for the CDPR, that'd be awesome. Put me a little bracket on the website or something like that. But guys, seriously, I appreciate you all for giving me your time. I'm hoping to do a bigger panel down the road. I'm going to find a day that works for everybody, because this was kind of like a couple people bailed out because they had stuff going on. So maybe we'll get a bigger one down the line. Maybe I talk to a few more people and everything as well too. But seriously, it's been a pleasure chatting with you guys. And I'm going to go back to digging through the archives and just trying to find out any other documents that can, help me pull my hair out some more, I guess. Thanks everybody for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank Podcast, and stay tuned for our next episode.